I always explain that we are 75 years from Bigfoot getting named, and we still don't have a body or really an interesting story beyond I saw a giant hairy hominid and that's it, So even paranormal stories can get very templated over time and get kind of boring, honestly. Like you just heard it too many times. So when I can find the ones that just stay weird or get weirder, that is kind of where I'm happy because nothing's worse than getting bored with the weird. when the weird becomes normal, it's just really sad, honestly. So the ones that keep getting weird and freshly weird is the ones that I like to live in.
Hello and welcome back to A Literal Journey, a place where I interview fantastic authors of great stories to help you author your own book or your own fantastic story. Today, I am trying so hard not to fangirl. I've got J.W. Ocker. He is an amazing author, a prolific author. He's the Edgar Award-winning author of Poe-land, The Hallowed Haunts of Edgar Allan Poe, A Season with the Witch, and Death and Douglas. His work has appeared in The Guardian, The Boston Globe, CNN, The Atlantic, and other places people stick writing. He's from Maryland, but has lived in New Hampshire for about 15 years or more than 15 years. He is also the creator of OTIS, which is the acronym for Odd Things I've Seen. You can find that at oddthingsi'veseen.com, where he writes about his visits to oddities of nature, history, art, and culture. JW, thank you so much for agreeing to be on this show. It is an absolute honor.
No, I appreciate the invite. This sounds like it's going to be a blast.
Yeah. So give our listeners, our viewers, a bit of background on you and what got you into storytelling, particularly in this genre that I love so much.
Yeah, so I write in a couple of genres. I write in, I have 4 middle grade novels. I have about half a dozen nonfiction books, and I have 1 adult novel. All of them have in common that they're spooky, though. So I write a lot in the spooky world. And I got into storytelling. I was somewhat typical, voracious reader when I was a kid, sitting in my room for like days at a time reading books from the library. And then I got into, went to college for English and, whatever, more writing stuff. And then I got into after I graduated, after I got my master's, I kind of went through a period of, depression and loneliness and stuff. And my writing wasn't that good. Didn't have anything to write about. I found myself pretty boring. So one day I realized, this is a dumb realization, but I realized it, that anything that's happened out in the world, like it happened in a place. There's a place that happened. There are artifacts that happened around, and you can just go there. You jump in your car and go there. So one day I just started, leaving my tiny little apartment in Brunswick, Massachusetts, Brunswick, Maryland, and just driving to weird stuff. And then I'd come home, and suddenly I had this weird thing to write about. It was like I visited it, I learned the history of it, and then I blogged about it. So I started out as a blogger. That's my storytelling origins, in this mewling thing that was called the internet at the time. And by writing about other things, by very interesting things that actually exist, I fell in love with nonfiction, and then I stumbled into children's writing in a different way. I don't know if you want that story, but I stumbled into children's writing in a different way. But I started out as just a nonfiction writer, just talking about all the cool stuff I'd seen traveling around the country.
Yeah, that did it for me too. I mean, I used to work at a place, it was about 20 years ago, and I would have to work 7 days on. It was a wilderness program. I'd work 7 days on, and I get 6 days off. And I would drive all around the United States, and just seeing these places totally changed my entire perspective. Just, it fills you with wonder.
It is exactly right. It widens your world. Every time I learn something where I'm like, how did I go my entire life without knowing that was true, without knowing that existed? The world becomes just a millimeter bigger, right? And the more experiences you have, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until ideally your perspective is one of wonder and one of exploration and one of not being surprised anymore, although you're always surprised. So yeah, it's exactly what it is. It kind of shows you the real world. Whereas, typically when I'm writing fiction, right, I'm usually just stuck in my office. I'm not leaving the house. I'm watching, all my information comes through the, internet or TV. And it's not as, it's always filtered through other people's perspectives. So it's not as broadening as just getting out there and seeing things with your own eyes.
A lot of authors that I talk to, they can point to a story or an author that sort of sets things in motion for them, kind of like a spiritual grandfather, if you will. Was there an author or a story where it just really opened your world or opened your eyes to a different world?
Oh, totally. It was Ray Bradbury. So I'm a huge Ray Bradbury fan. Actually, behind me, that's his coat. That's art from his house. It's all that
No
stuff is
way.
Ray Bradbury stuff. Yeah. And up there, I don't know if you can see it. There's a severed head of a child. That's from the Something Wicked This Way Comes movie that he wrote the script for, and it's based on his book. So massive fan of Ray Bradbury because two reasons. A, because he writes with such joy. Like I've never seen, and people always call it purple prose and talk about Ray Bradbury, but it's really just prose written with joy. And I don't have that. I don't have that gene in my body. I'm very much a cynic, curmudgeon, just stuck in the mud kind of guy. So I'm always like looking at his work, being like, man, how do I get there? How do I get there? How do I get there? I never can. And the other part of him that I love is how he minds his own self for his books, right? For his stories. That is kind of what makes us, makes us all different is what's inside of us, right? So like him being able to mine his life for his stories always kind of inspired me. Inspired me to like look at my life, but also inspired me to try to live a little better, like try to do more interesting stuff so that I have something to mine. So in those two ways, but really it's his just the joy in his prose. Also the fact that he focused on Halloween and spooky stuff that always kind of drew me as well. Like the Halloween tree is amazing. But really it's his joy at writing that I've always wanted to capture. Because I write a lot. I'm an obsessive writer. I love writing. But the joy, I don't feel like I have the joy that he does when I like read his text. So his copy. So like he's always been my North Star that I'll never reach,
Okay, so first of all, before I ask you about the stuff you have, I'm so glad you said it was a prop of a severed head and not a severed head of a child, because you let it hang for a little bit, and I was like, a severed head of a child is in
my oldest daughter. When she was like 4, I would tell her it was like it used to be her brother that she doesn't have anymore. But yeah, it's very realistic. It's the blonde hair. I think it's Halloran, this Halloran. It's who it is. It's that scene where they're running from the dark carnival and they run to this guillotine that cuts off a version of him, and it's his head rolls in the basket. It's that thing. So
that's crazy. And so those are actual, like his coat, his actual overcoat.
That's his coat. He bought it when he went to Ireland to write the script for Moby Dick. And he wrote it. If you ever read Green Island White Whale, I think it's called. I always mix that up. That's like a anthology of short stories based on his time in Ireland, and that's one of his coats he wore over there. I have some of his awards, some of his contracts, some of his Halloween decorations. That's what I really love, is having some of his Halloween decorations.
That's incredible. That's incredible. That was okay. I could talk to you for a long time about that, but. In any good story, the setting is very important. Before the interview began, we were both talking about settings of our upbringing. I'm from Alaska and how that had an effect on me. You said that you actually moved to New England because of the setting, that you really enjoyed that.
Yeah. So I grew up in Maryland. I love Maryland. Like whatever. I'm a, Chesapeake Bay crab kind of guy. But I always loved New England because, they have the oldest history in the country, right? Going back to the 1600s, they have amazingly atmospheric graveyards, and all these people who I admired were from New England, and like it just seemed to have this ambiance and this kind of dark cast to it that no other place in the country really had. So I really wanted to go to New England. So I've been trying to get to New England after I graduated my master's. I remember like faking addresses and trying to get up there and never could. And then one day in 2008, suddenly got a job offer in my inbox, and I'm, just starting out my life at the time, and just came up to New England again, not because of the job. I already had a job. It's just, I wanted to live in New England. I wanted that kind of like that unique feel that New England has that no other place in America has. And, I've loved it ever since, the incredibly vibrant falls and the white Christmases and the spookiness of the history and the depth of the history and the relevance of the history, and just everything seems to always tie back to New England in some way. So I don't regret it. I love it up here. I still am boggled by the place every day.
So you're living up in New England. I mean, when did your career as a writer you felt really start to take off? When did you start? What were you starting to do in order to become a writer?
I can also credit New England for that, actually. So I started so OTIS was like you mentioned, my blog, Odd Things I've Seen, where I would write about all my travels. And, I at some point I realized, oh, maybe I can write a nonfiction book that involves all my trips to oddities. These are very interesting stories. Couldn't really, I think I had one attempt at selling it, didn't really work out. But then when I moved to New England, my perspective changed. I was like, oh, wait, instead of just being a general travel oddities guy, New England oddities is a thing. That is a category. That is a genre, right?
Yeah.
So I changed my pitches and put together a pitch for New England oddities. I actually put together 2 pitches. One was for New England literary sites, because this place is just maggoty with literary sites. And the other one was for New England death-related sites. And sent it out to a New England publisher, what I thought was a New England publisher. It turns out they were owned by W.W. Norton in Manhattan. But they were headquartered in Vermont at the time. And I think my first, they accepted it right away. They wanted the death one. They didn't want the literary one. They wanted the death one. And that's that's how I got my first book deal, was because of New England. So again, had I stayed in Maryland, I don't know, it'd been a way different path at the very least. But that's when it started. I did a book about New England strange stuff when I moved up here. And
what was your first, major manuscript that you submitted and they came back, the publisher came back and said, yeah, we'd actually like to go for this?
That's the one. It's called the New England Grimpendium because it's a bad title. Like I didn't know about SEO back then. Nobody will search for a word you made up, right? But I was trying to explain the concept, because back then and for a while there, paranormal books were massively popular, right? So if you wrote a book called Spooky New England, you'd think it's about paranormal sites, ghostly haunts, and mine wasn't. Mine was about death-related sites. There's some of that in there, of course, but it was more about the macabre. So, there's a whole section on cemeteries in there, a whole section on sites connected to famous people who made their careers in the macabre. So it wasn't like haunted places at all. So I was trying to differentiate from those books. But of course, in doing so, I just kind of titled myself off the page, if that makes sense.
Well, probably not now. I mean, I assume in subsequent books, people are buying those and then they're going into your catalog and grabbing those. There's
still, even though, so the New England Grimpendium came out in 2010, and then my follow-up 2 years later was the New York Grimpendium. So I did the same thing. I think in New England, I drove like 6,000 or 7,000 miles of road trips to find everything. So this is also places I visited personally. So it was an excuse for me to get out there. All my nonfiction, I'm not the kind of guy that just wants to do research and write a book and continue the knowledge of mankind. They're all selfish. I want to go do something. I want to experience things. So they're always excuses to go experience something and to meet people. All my nonfiction books, I got friends out of them. So that one was one of them. So I drove 6,000 miles, 7,000 miles of New England roads for the New England Grimpendium. And then the New York Grimpendium, because I still hadn't learned my lesson yet. The New York Grimpendium was another, I think, 7,000 miles just in New York, not counting me driving into New York. So, and they still sell somehow. I mean, obviously they're not like barn burners, but I get royalty checks. So that's how it all started. Very local, very macabre, very experiential, very much nonfiction. It was my first, nonfiction became my natural voice, even though I never thought about nonfiction. I got like bad grades in expository writing in college. So I never really thought about, nonfiction. But the thing is, some of the magazines I was reading at the time had this very unique voice. It was like Wizard, Toy Fair. Those were kind of magazines back in the late 90s. They had a very unique voice where they talked right to you. And then when the internet came along, I'm pretty positive that that Wizard comic world influenced the voice of the internet. So now the voice of the internet was always talking right at you, like you're sitting beside them, not like composing, not like, so that kind of developed my voice. The blogging developed my voice, the internet voice. And then that translated to books somehow. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got into nonfiction. Then after the New York Grimpendium, I started doing more single narrative books instead of like individual essay based books, and doing like a whole story, Edgar Allan Poe, Salem, Massachusetts, those kinds of things.
Yeah, you're talking about living the dream. That it's not to expand the knowledge of mankind like some sort of Star Trek ethic. It's no, I'm doing this. I want to go somewhere, and I'm going to use this as a tax write-off. I want to be able to go.
You should see my tax write-offs. They are like just they're silly, but I mean they're legit, but they're silly just because what I get to write off as a result of it. And also, and again, the book is, I'm a writer, so I love the book, but it really is the cherry on top. Coming out of these experiences with, a more appreciation of the stuff I already thought I loved but didn't know anything about, like Poe or Salem. And friends, the people I interviewed, the people I use for resources, some of them are my best friends still today. So like the experience of the books is what is valuable for me. The books themselves are awesome, love them, but like the experience is really what actually changes my life and makes my life better and gives me experiences at the end of the day.
Well, Paul Tremblay, he gave advice in my interview with him. It was so good. It's worth repeating, and it relates to this. He said, terrible advice is talking about, writing about what you know. That's terrible advice. He said, good advice is write your obsessions. And
that's really good. I've never heard him say that. That's really good. It's true because, man, I don't want to like build off his insight because that's really good insight. I'll let that sit. That's really good insight. But I'm going to think about it after this podcast. Put it that way. Because that's literally what I do. I like, in my mind, I get so obsessed with something just over the course of my life that when I'm ready to do a book about it, I'm like, okay, this is where I cap off the obsession. No longer will this be an obsession in my life because I'll have done it, right? And it turns out it just magnifies the obsession every single time. Like I write a book about Poe, and now my entire library upstairs is Poe decorated. I write a book about Salem. My entire dining room is decorated for Salem. I'm writing a book about the Headless Horseman in Sleepy Hollow. My entire bathroom was decorated Headless Horseman in Sleepy Hollow. So it becomes more obsessive. So it's like, that's not the cure. I don't know what the cure is, but it's definitely not getting more into them, apparently.
How does your family handle that? They walk in, there's a severed head over here. They go into the bathroom, there's the Headless Horseman there, and there's a lot of decapitations. So
I've got 3 girls, and I was never the type of parent where I wanted to force my interest on them. I just was not. I see it all the time, especially 80s fans, right? They're always trying to get their kids to play Nintendo instead of stream, whatever, So, and I was never that guy, not because I was like an advanced parent, but because I'm a selfish dude, as I mentioned already. And they were my things, they're my hobbies, my life, my experiences. You go find your own, and they'll be more. Then they will be more valuable to you if you find them on your own. I think, just like that's for me. But then over time, when you're a guy that wears his passions on his sleeve or on his shelves and walls, as I do, they all started getting more and more into it until they've become more motivator in what I do than even myself in the tasks. So I'm getting to that part of my life. I'm old enough where I'm getting tired, right? So back in the day, I'll do a 16-hour road trip on a weekend. I don't care. And I still do them, but it's easy for me to talk myself out of them, right? It's easy for me to be like, I really got stuff to do. But my girls, almost every time, Dad, where are we going? Let's get up early, let's do it. And they help me like get over the lazy hump. So they've actually become really involved in it, and they're in some of the books. They go with me on adventures. They read the books. They are a big part of keeping it going in my life, honestly. So they've adjusted to it. What I like the most about them, I think, and what I accidentally did right is they're very curious kids. They're always looking for the story behind it. We watch a movie, they're immediately Googling more information about the movie afterwards. We go visit a site, they're immediately going online and trying to figure out more information about the site. So that curiosity is, the best I can hope for as a parent is that'll serve them better than, me. Than a lot of things, not everything, than a lot of things.
That's amazing.
That's been fun. And again, it's another reason to write this nonfiction. So I write children's novels for them as well. They're that age. Some of them are at that age, and they read them, they like them, whatever. Maybe they like them, maybe they don't. But it's not as validating as, Dad, I just read this thing in your book. Can we go see that? I'm like, yeah, we'll go Saturday. We'll just drive up to it. We just watched. So my oldest daughter is just finished watching Moon Knight, which came out a couple of years ago, right? That Marvel series on Disney.
Yeah.
And Dad, you have to watch it with me. And like, so we all watch movies together, me and the 3 girls. And so we all went through Moon Knight, and it was so full of Egyptology stuff. I had no idea. I'm a big Egypt fan. I love Egypt. And I didn't know this thing was so full of Egyptian lore and iconography. And after that, I was like, you guys want to go see real mummies? Like, yeah. So like that weekend we went and saw mummies. So like tying that curiosity, like there's more out there. Don't just consume and like use is something I'm really trying with them. That seems to be sticking. And again, it just makes the experience more valuable for me, right? So I can go research a book and they come with me, and I'm doing work technically, but I'm also spending time with my kids. And that experience again becomes so much more valuable than the actual work that it's not even a contest if I like weighed the scale, the balance of the scales, which sounds cheesy, right? You always hear like, like Bob Dylan or some massive voice of culture say, best thing I ever did was my kids. And I'm like, are they? Like you're Bob Dylan,
some kids can be dicks,
yeah. Or even like great people, it doesn't matter. You are Bob Dylan, you did these albums, you did these movies. I don't believe that for a second. But I, as a father now, I get it, right? I get what he's saying is for him, as much as he got money and fame and like lauded for his work, the satisfaction will still always be the kids and the relationship with the kids, right? So I kind of get it. I still don't believe it in Bob Dylan's case, but in my case, it's definitely true where, the kids make that work so much more valuable.
Every protagonist along their story, they meet resistance. In your writing career, what was the resistance you were encountering, either internal, external, in getting published, getting your work out there?
Yeah, so it's interesting because my publishing journey was relatively not hard. I got very lucky. So I think partly because I started in nonfiction. I wasn't, because the novel game is really hard, right? That's a super hard situation. But with nonfiction, I kind of had a back door because, everybody's always looking for nonfiction. Nonfiction gets a lot more press, it seems like. Like I do a talk. Every book I've ever done is nonfiction. I have a talk around it I can do for events. It's not true of my novels, right? Novels usually do readings, and readings are the most boring things on the planet. I don't like hearing people read to me, especially like writers who aren't trained orators. I just don't like that. But nonfiction, I can get up there with a slide presentation and walk them through the lessons learned, the artifacts found, and it's like a lot of fun. So it was kind of so for me, I had that first book, then I write one every 2 years because there's so much travel involved in those books that it took me a long time to get them done. And then I again, very fortunately, was able to go cross genre. So I'd done a few nonfiction books, and I got into children's publishing. Then I got an adult novel published, and I'm still continuing all three of those fronts. Whereas, when an author gets kind of one genre, they can do one book a year usually, depending on their contracts. So, and then I won a few awards early on. So it was kind of a relatively easy process once I actually started it. But what the hard part to get there was just writing all the time. Like, I just, back in the early days when I wanted to be a writer without actually writing, that's kind of, people can take that on as a persona more than an actual act. I wasn't writing. Like, I'm barely writing. I was thinking about writing. I jotted a few notes down. But then once I started blogging, I was obsessively writing every single day. That's kind of where the lumps are taken, right? And that's always the advice I give to writers as well, because there is no good advice for writers. There's none. The publishing changes every 3 seconds. Most successful writers kind of luck their way there. Networking is important, as it is in every single field. But in the end, the only thing you have control of is obsessively writing. Just keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. And that's kind of what I did until I started doing these, started out with this local interest book, New England, and got a little bigger, got a little luckier, found an agent, lost that agent, found another agent. So it was, I didn't have very many barriers, but I also had a very weird path as well. Which also might be advice, is take a weird path. But
take a weird path. I like that.
So, I don't have any good advice, because if I tried this again, I couldn't replicate the success at all. Even knowing what I know now, I couldn't replicate the success. It's just a lot of just keep working, keep grinding, And it is especially these days, writing is a time game. Like back in the day, when writing had less competition and a more literate society, your first book if getting published was almost like the goal, because then from that point on, you're almost set. Like, you do like mid-list writing, you can get big, all those things are like much more possible than they are today. But today, you just want to be steady. Like, just build up a backlist, build up, even books that don't sell well, just keep writing them. Just build up a backlist and keep doing it, and opportunities will happen. Capitalize on the opportunities, obviously, and the lucky bounces. But it is just slow and steady these days. That's how you get success. If you don't get it right away, I guess, which is rarer and rarer these days.
That's incredible. I think that's going to be the takeaway line, the episode title, Take a Weird Path.
Yeah, it's manual labor. I always try to describe it this way, even though it's not manual labor, it has the same quality of manual labor, where you just put your head down and you keep going till it's over, and you keep going till it's over, and you keep going till it's over. Who cares how your head feels, how you feel? You just got to do your job. So it is just slow and steady. But again, taking the weird path has helped me out. Again, if I hadn't started blogging about, I think the first few things I wrote about were, because I lived in the Mid-Atlantic, so I had access to a lot more areas. It was the Mothman statue in Point Pleasant was one of the first things I visited. It was Centralia. It was the Orson Welles War of the Worlds Monument in New Jersey. And then it was the Egyptian pyramids, because I had recently come back from there. So that one doesn't count. That one's pretty massive. The other three things are just random things you could just drive to on any given Saturday. And starting my writing career in that way, again, nobody starts their career, very few starts bloggers, and certainly very few starts travel bloggers to the weird. But it definitely worked for me.
I love it. I love that advice, taking a weird path and just pushing forward on that path. Talk to our listeners about your book Poe-land, and then I want to talk about the reception to that book because it's been phenomenal.
Poe-land, again, this was my first attempt at a single narrative book where instead of me going to a place, writing 1,000 words about it, going to the place, writing 1,000 words together and putting it together, from start to finish, it was one topic, Edgar Allan Poe. And again, my idea here, I've always been obsessed with Poe. Like I remember as a kid when I came across The Raven, having this uncontrollable urge to memorize it. Like not for a school assignment, I just had to memorize it. I needed part of my body and my DNA to call up anytime I wanted to because I was just so like enamored with it. So Poe has always been an obsession of mine, right? And then I come from Maryland, right? They get a football team that's named after named after a poem, which shouldn't, never should happen.
The Ravens, yeah. Right? Yeah.
It's the nothing happened for any other poet, right? There's no chance because poetry is so anti,
sports.
Yeah, hairy men just bashing into each other, right? There's nothing delicate about that. But for some reason, Poe's different. He's cool enough. You can name your team after his poem. You can't do that with Longfellow or Dickinson. You can't do that. It wouldn't fly. But you can do that with Poe. And so Poe was just a very different presence. And so I wanted to write about him, but I also still wanted to travel and have experiences. I didn't want to write a biography where I just kind of like research books and sit in my room and go to libraries and that's it, right? Which is valid. Like the people that do that work are important, so important because they're like continuing the knowledge of humankind. I just wanted to go places. So I figured out this plan of there's a lot of stuff left over from Poe, from monuments to places he lived, to artifacts, to his burial site, his birth site, all these things. So I just started treating it like a travelogue of Poe places. And it turned into a biography really, because I kind of pieced Poe together based on what's left over of him today or whatever, when it was 2016, whatever this was. So I built a picture of Poe based on what is left over today. And it was so much fun. I ended up going to 6 or 7 states plus England because he spent some time in England and, got to see wonders, see things that I should never have had access to really, and it was so fulfilling and I made friends. I had these experiences. It won an award for me, which I think got me my first agent, but again, randomly won that award and kind of cheating. It was the Edgars, and the Edgars are from the Mystery Writers of America, and they name their name and shape their award after Edgar Allan Poe because he invented the mystery genre. Like Sherlock Holmes is based on Auguste de Dupin, which is a Poe character from Murders in the Rue Morgue and a couple other things, but he invented the mystery genre. So they have that out there. So writing a book about Poe and getting a Poe award is kind of cheating. But that's kind of what I guess first brought me to prominence outside of like local New York and New England books. But yeah, that's one of my favorite experiences. Still to this day, what I got to do as a result of that book.
Related to that, because I'm fascinated with Edgar Allan Poe. I've got a massive collection of his behind me. Fascinated with Edgar Allan Poe. Just there's so many different angles I could take this. I love that he invented the mystery novel or mystery story. He inspired Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, correct? It was
That's right.
Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, and so the really fascinating thing for me about his life is actually his death and the mystery that surrounds his death. What do you think, with your research that's gone into it, what do you think the most likely angle of that is? In fact, set it up. I mean, if you could explain to our listeners why it's so mysterious how he died, and then kind of explain what you think may have occurred.
So Poe, one of the reasons why that book was possible, because Poe was a bit perambulatory. Like he was always changing major cities looking for work, right? So he lived in New York, and he grew up in Virginia. He was born in Boston. He lived in Maryland for a time. He spent a lot of time in Rhode Island. He lived in South Carolina when he was in the military. He lived over in England. So he was in a lot of places. At the time of his death, he was 40 years old. He was probably the most famous he'd ever been. He still didn't have massive fame, but The Raven had kind of put him a little bit on the map. He was still broke. He was still like all those things. His wife had died. She died of tuberculosis. She'd already passed at that point. He was living in New York. He was spending a lot of time in Virginia trying to woo some people, woo a wife. And he was on his way to, I believe it was Philadelphia, to do an editing gig, and then didn't show up at the editing gig, and then was found in Maryland. He wasn't supposed to be in Maryland. He was found in Baltimore. Wasn't supposed to be there. He was found, outside of this what they call a polling place, which is what they call it. It's a place where people vote. There's no ambiguity there. He was knocked out. He wasn't wearing his clothes. He had somebody else's walking stick. He was not coherent. So they took him to the nearby hospital where he stayed incoherent for, I think 3 days and then died. And we don't know what happened to him. We don't know, did he get drunk and, get something? There's like theories of rabies. He got bit. But the one that everybody brings up, and the one that most of the important scholars bring up, is just there was this practice where in order to rig elections, they would take people and get them really drunk and threaten violence and then make them go vote for a particular person or issue and then come out, change their clothes, disguise them, make them go in again, do it again. So people think he was just brutalized and drunk in that way and died as a result of injuries for that. And there's some term, it just escaped my mind, of what that practice is, of like, forcing people to vote. But that's what they think he is. And so far that seems to be the most likely answer, because again, he was in somebody else's clothes, he was incoherent, he was in a city he should not have been in. He wasn't there. So the answer is kind of interesting, but also boring too. Like, you want the man who invented mystery to have a mysterious death, which he did, which is pretty amazing. But the answer to every mystery on the planet, by the way, is usually pretty disappointing.
Yeah, you kind of want it to be like something supernatural got him in the end.
Supernatural, or he went crazy. We love talking about Poe being mad. Like, that would sate our sordid interest, right? If he just went crazy and, which you couldn't do at one point in time. But if that was the end, he just went insane and just ended up, slumped over at a bar or outside of an establishment, that would also fit our narrative of Poe, which, by the way, is pretty inaccurate. But still, that would be a nice little arc.
He did have an issue with alcohol. He couldn't consume anymore.
It's vague. We do know that he did claim to have an issue with alcohol. We don't know what that issue was, if he drank too much, if he was susceptible to it. We do know it also ruined his relationship with Sarah Helen Whitman in Rhode Island, because he took a drink when he wasn't supposed to. So he did have some issue, but whether he was, the drunken wandering through the hallways spouting dark poetry guy, or if he just had a normal issue that we all have, technically, most people have an issue with alcohol, especially after, post-COVID. If it's just like normal, he drinks too much or gets a little silly when drunk, we don't know. But it wasn't this, I don't think it was this all-consuming disease that defined his life, like the way we kind of like present it sometimes.
What story did you start researching as fun folklore, and then you end up thinking, oh, okay, something really weird actually happened here?
That's a good question. I think the Mothman, the Mothman story, which I brought up already, is one that's getting to be pretty mainstream these days. But that one was always fascinating to me, right? Because the basic story is a humanoid insect was spotted for about a year, here and there. But then when you dig into kind of the primary accounts, and John Keel's most of the primary accounts, so we can take that with a grain of salt, but apparently all kinds of stuff was happening there. Like, every single phenomenon possible, like in the paranormal world, seemed to be happening in Point Pleasant during that year, if you believe John Keel. UFOs, tiny people, weird creatures. So the more you dig into that story, the weirder and weird. It's not just like your typical cryptid, a sighting and then you never saw it again. It was one of the weirdest stories out there. That's probably my big one, where like the deeper you go with Mothman, the weirder it gets. And again, not the more credible. It doesn't get more credible, I don't think, but it gets weirder, which is all I ask usually. But that's one that has layers that, people are already, they're discovering Mothman itself, but eventually they'll discover all the layers beneath it of how weird that story is.
Yeah, I remember listening to one of my favorite podcasts is Astonishing Legends.
Yeah.
And they did a whole series on it, and it just got straight. And they're like, we're sorry. It's like Skinwalker Ranch. We're like, we're sorry. There's no real narrative to this. It just gets weirder. Like, I'm trying to find a through line to tell this. You're like, well, then Bigfoot shows up at some point, and there's UFOs. Right. It just gets weirder. But I like that. I like that, the inexplainable. If you're going to go research something that's unexplainable, expect to come out without any explanation of why it's happening.
Which is what I want, because these days, I mean, I always explain that we are 75 years from Bigfoot getting named, and we still don't have a body, or really an interesting story beyond, I saw a giant hairy hominid and that's it, So even paranormal stories can get very templated over time and get kind of boring, honestly. Like, you just heard it too many times. So when I can find the ones that just stay weird or get weirder, that is kind of where I'm happy, because nothing's worse than getting bored with the weird. when the weird becomes normal, it's just really sad, honestly. So the ones that keep getting weird and freshly weird is the ones that I like to live in.
Well, on that note, you mentioned Bigfoot. You had written a book called The United States of Cryptids. Give our listeners a bit of background or an idea of what that book is, and then I'll ask you a couple of questions related to that.
Yeah, this is interesting. So after I wrote Cursed Objects, I got together with my editor, and she said, we should do another book like this. Like, what's like Cursed Objects? I'm like, I thought some ideas, whatever. And then she's like, well, what about cryptids? Cryptids seem to be like, people seem to have a big interest in cryptids. And I'm like, well, I love cryptids. I've loved cryptids since I was a kid, but I don't want to do a cryptid book. And she's like, why not? I'm like, well, every single year, a cryptid encyclopedia comes out. Somebody puts together a compendium of, regurgitated stories over and over again. And it's the same book every year. And I don't want to do that. I need something to like interest me and make me think I'm doing something valuable. And even if it's not valuable, I need to at least pretend it is. And she said, well, I think you should think about it. You should think about doing a cryptid book. I'm like, all right, I'll think about it. So I went away and I started digging through my OTIS archives and realizing that I visited a lot of places that are known for cryptids because of the cryptids. And I'm like, well, why am I visiting them? I mean, these are sightings. They're just folklore. They're not connected to anything. Then I realized I'm visiting museums and statues and historical plaques and festivals. And I'm like, oh, this is what I can do. I can do my kind of book, a travel log using cryptids. And what I learned there is almost every single state has at least one town where they're celebrating their local sighting, either through, again, a plaque that talks about it, or a statue, or a museum, or an annual festival. And once I had that kind of angle, I could write a book about celebrating cryptids, about, actually having these cryptids having whether you believe in them or not is irrelevant. If they're having an effect on places, then they're real, right? The effect is real at the very least. So that fascinated me and gave me the opportunity to just drive to places and party and, see things. And so my cryptid encyclopedia, quote unquote, is more travelogue that also talks about the stories of what inspired these celebrations and these monuments and these these memoriams. So that's kind of what it is. That's why it's different, right? There is 1,000 cryptid encyclopedias and really good books about cryptids. You're not going to find one. Well, mine sticks out because it is about the places that celebrate them almost as much as it is about the original stories.
Well, I told you that I'm from Alaska. What was it that you researched up in Alaska as a...
That was the Kodiak dinosaur. So again, one of my problems with cryptids was, again, everybody has a Bigfoot story. I wanted a variety of monsters in here. I think I have 70 in the book, but I didn't want it to be like Bigfoot, kind of Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. I didn't want it to be like the same creatures over and over again. I wanted variety. I wanted insects and amphibians and lizards and bird. I wanted every kind of cryptid I could find. And so by the time I got to Alaska, Alaska is like, again, one of the most plausible places for undiscovered creatures in the country, right? Is Alaska. And, but I'd already kind of exhausted Bigfoot, the Pacific Northwest and that kind of thing. And then I found this like story that got printed in all these magazines of this sonar reading of a giant creature in the waters of Alaska. And I'm like, that's perfect. Giant Alaska has a giant cryptid. That's the story I need. They don't celebrate them yet. So a couple of states don't celebrate their cryptids. They don't have towns that celebrate their cryptids. So when I got to those states, I kind of pitched the cryptid that they should celebrate. And in that case, I think it was the Kodiak. I can't remember if it's the Kodiak monster or the Kodiak dinosaur, but it's basically a giant plesiosaur type creature, which again, there's a million of those stories. But in this case, we're talking about off the shores of Alaska. We're not talking about some tiny pond or loch where a creature can't live. Off the shores. And then we had the scientific sonar reading of this giant mass shaped like a plesiosaur off Alaska. And I'm like, yeah, if there are dinosaurs, it's going to be Alaska where we find them. No offense.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I mean, like, I have no doubt there's something that, they have the Alaska Triangle up there. And we, our neighbors and our churches, they would do these camping trips. But there was areas where they were like, no, we're not going anywhere near that because there's just a lot of unexplained disappearances and you just don't mess with it.
I think it made it into my Don't Go There book. I can't remember the name of the bay, but there's some bay there with like otter creatures and people would start going like lose time and like crazy things would happen. But there's a of the 30 sites in the book, Alaska has one of them. Yeah, and the book covers the entire world, by the way. So it's not just like 30 sites in America, 30 sites in the world, and Alaska definitely made it in there.
I lived in, I this is totally random. I lived in Russia for a while.
Yeah.
There's a little town called Usarisk. It's kind of closer to Alaska. And they have the Siberian tigers out in that area. And this old, Russian man was talking to me one day, and he says, just off the cuff, he says, "Oh yeah. When we were helping build the town, I don't know if it was that one or Khabarovsk, it was close by. He says, when we were helping build, we'd have to shut down everything at night and huddle together because that's when the tigers would circle the workplace." And I was like, what? It's just like whatever, and give me some more vodka. It was just was totally offhand. Yeah. Just amazing stuff that you don't, a lot of wonder, superstition, frightening things out there in the wilderness.
We forget we've GPSed the world down, satellited down to the square inch. We forget there's still massive swaths of the world that it's just a giant. We forget how giant the planet is. It's easy for us to forget that it is a massive place. So, I mean, there's no way we've mapped it all. I hope not. Anyway, that'd be also a boring thing if we kind of like explored every square inch of the planet. But yeah, there's still places.
I agree. There. I mean, if there's no room for wonder, then what point is there to still live? Because that's what makes life worth living, is the wonder and the mystery of it all.
I agree. Totally agree.
To that end, what your new book coming out in July, I believe, is about paranormal or strange places. Don't go there, right?
Yeah, it's hard to describe. I haven't been able to come up with a good log line for it. But it's called "Don't Go There," a tour of the world's most sinister spots, and it's places in the world that have accrued layers and layers of competing mythologies and real life stuff as well. So they're paranormal in the sense that like they have ghost stories and UFO stories and cryptid stories, but they also have serial killer stories, and they also have these actual dangers or actual real life dangers or physical dangers. The Bermuda Triangle is the classic one, right? That's kind of the idea behind it. And where that one is, it's not, if you look at the stats, it's not the most dangerous swath of water on the planet by a long shot. But for some reason, this spot has accumulated lore upon lore upon lore, from Atlantis to like trans-dimensional warp holes to UFOs to, even the natural explanations are terrifying. So the point is, all these places are both naturally terrifying, but also have this layer of paranormally terrifying on top of them. So it's not like haunted houses or asylums. They have to be big deserts. The book's divided up into deserts, forests, islands, snowscapes, and some other, maybe it's sea, maybe it's ocean, maybe it's water. It's entire swaths of the planet that have accrued such tales and stories that they've become kind of like the most mysterious spots on the planet.
So I'm basically about 2.5 hours, maybe 3 from Skinwalker Ranch. I'm assuming that made it in your book.
It's in there. Yep.
Yeah. What in your research did you find interesting or compelling about Skinwalker Ranch?
Again, it's the variety, right? It would be really easy with two things. One is the number of billionaires that have owned that ranch is the first amazing thing. The amount of government money that has been siphoned into investigating it is also super interesting. And then the variety of phenomena, right? It's not just like, sometimes when people think of Skinwalker Ranch, they just think, it's an alien hotspot. No. I mean, it kind of is, but there's all kinds of weird stuff that they can't describe happening there. And that is kind of the story for me. But also the progression of how it started out as a regular ranch. This one family got involved and it became a weird ranch. This billionaire buys it, is well connected with government, and gets a bunch of funds to actually do experiments there. It's bought by another billionaire who does the same thing, but also is a bit more media savvy and gets a TV show and is big into like the paranormal in general. And it is what I always say, because if you believe in this phenomenon or you don't believe in this phenomenon is irrelevant if it's a good story, right? And Skinwalker Ranch, whether you believe it is or isn't, it is a very interesting story. So yeah, it's a good example of it because, again, variety of phenomena, and just if you take away the phenomena, it's still an interesting story. The story of these billionaires running this ranch and funding massive experimentation around things they believe we can't comprehend is a fascinating story by itself.
Of the places and the cryptids that you've researched, so this is 2 separate questions. What what cryptid do you believe most likely to be real or have some basis in truth? Yeah. And then what place do you believe has some basis of truth?
So cryptids is interesting because it is a valid scientific phenomenon. Like we have had cryptids, like the kraken. We found the giant and colossal squids, right? The okapi was a cryptid. Nobody believed it. The gorilla, nobody believed in. Platypus, nobody believed platypus was a real creature except for Australians for forever. Even when they had like dead like carcasses in their hands, they'd be like, "No, you built this."
no one takes Australians seriously.
no, like this creature doesn't exist. This is you're having a lark. This is a jackalope, right? So the idea of the scientific mainstream accepting the existence of certain animals happens all the time, right? The coelacanth is a great one because we thought that thing was gone for hundreds of millions of years. Turns out it was never gone. It was always there. So there are real cryptids in the sense of you don't have to like be anti-science to believe in cryptids, right? As far as the ones that are most plausible to me, so I'm going to say not Bigfoot anymore because Bigfoot is plausible in the sense it doesn't stretch our imaginations. It's biologically plausible, right? It's just slightly bigger than us and hairier than us, right? There's not much to add to me to make a Bigfoot. But after 75 years, and the origin of how Bigfoot started, the whole Bigfoot name, you start having a lot of doubts. Even the paranormal community is having doubts. That's why these days they're trying to pretend it's like a ghost or a transdimensional character or something like that, or a figment of I can't remember the name of it, but it's like it's a thought form like made by a bunch of people believing. But to me, it's ocean. Anything in the ocean. Even though we've sent James Cameron to the bottom of it, we can't plummet. It's too vast. It's too big. It's too alien to our existence. Like we cannot be down there for very long. So if there are large undiscovered creatures, it's definitely going to be in the ocean. It can be, some of the more unexplored regions of the world as well. But compared to the ocean, that thing, there's still so much down there that we just don't know, just because it's massive and alien.
Well, talk to me a little bit about the books that you've written for middle grade audiences. What inspired some of those?
So that started weirdly. So I didn't mean to be a child's author, but then I read, but I've also kind of always like Bradbury, before the idea of a middle grade genre or audience is a pretty recent phenomenon. I think it started with Harry Potter, honestly. Before then, if you had a book with child protagonist, it was just a book. It could just be a book, unless it was like a picture book or a chapter book. And I was reading, so I kind of liked books for kids, spooky books for kids, just very nostalgic for me. And I was reading Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is a great concept. Like whatever, the Jungle Book in a graveyard is one of the best concepts I've ever heard. And then I read that first chapter and I was blown away by that first chapter. It was vicious. It was scary. It didn't hold back punch. Entire family gets stabbed in their beds, basically, in the first chapter of The Graveyard Book. Like one little kid, kind of like little toddler, toddles away by accident. But it is vicious. I'm like, you can do this in children's literature. And then I read the rest of the book. And the rest of the book was a little bit of a letdown because it stopped being that intense. And everything got explained away with magic and kind of softened it. The rest of the book really softened that first chapter a lot. And I was like, well, what would happen if you read a kid's book where that first chapter never got softened? So then I wrote that book. It's called Death and Douglas, and it's a story of a kid who lives in a mortuary. He's a fourth generation funeral director. He's 12 years old in New England, and a serial killer keeps filling his basements, right? Because he sleeps above a morgue because his house is an old Victorian funeral home. So I wrote a book about serial killers for 7 to 12-year-olds. And that kind of got me loving that process of writing for that audience, because that audience, especially horror, that audience it's like you're saying before, they have the best capability for wonder. Like everything is amazing to them, whether it's planets or a lead pencil. A certain part of their life, they find everything to be a revelation, and it's beautiful, right? And terror is really related to wonder, right? Awestruck, awful, even linguistically, it's all kind of related together. So horror is a type of wonder. And so they have a very wide taste for horror as well. Whereas adults, we are very prescribed. I'm a horror lover, but horror is a comfort to me. So, I want my haunted house book, and I want my werewolf book, and you see horror authors that are out there, the big ones, they do that, right? That this is my vampire book, this is my haunted house book, this is my witch book. And it's not, in my opinion, it's not doing horror at its most potent. For me, creating your own monster is where it becomes the most potent. Shelley did it, Romero did it. And children will take those new monsters. Like if I tried to give a new monster to an adult in a book, they're not going to be as into it as if I gave them their favorite genre of monster, right? Whereas kids, they're new to werewolves and vampires and everything in between, they'll accept everything. So they have a chance for you to really stretch yourself as a writer and as an imagination and your creativity as for that audience in ways you can never do for adults. And so in some ways they're kind of more hardcore than adults are. And so I just started falling in love writing books that I thought could push children literature a little bit as far as like what's allowed, what's fear-wise, what's allowed fear-wise, and what's allowed concept-wise. And just kind of I fell in love with doing that. And like the writing for children was just so much more rewarding than writing for adults when it comes to fiction. And so that's kind of how I got involved with writing horror novels for children, was just that random, if you don't like a book, it's not the book's fault. Go write the book you wanted to write. That kind of like old saw turned out to be true in my case. And then I just kind of got caught up in that through random bounces. I got the opportunity to write some more books for kids. So that's kind of it. I just love the idea of giving kids something brand new instead of like doing hand-me-down monsters and hand-me-down horrors. They'll find those. They'll find the mummy stories. They'll find the ghost stories. Give them something that they won't find naturally. It's kind of the fun in it for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I agree with you. I like that. I like a good scary story. I don't like a slasher story because it lacks plot. I love a mystery. I love a good character and seeing them overcome something in a scary environment. I love it. I'm
watching a child try to solve a serial killer murder mystery was like massively challenging, right? And I also didn't want to do the trope where I killed off their parents or orphans, so they have the run of the town. He has family, he has a mom, he has a dad, he's like all these kind of constraints around him. It just so happens he has access to the evidence because he sleeps above bodies, right? Because he's in a funeral home.
Gene.
So it's just an opportunity to kind of deal with that. I think it's my only non-supernatural book, actually, with Death and Douglas, just because that concept to me was just so interesting. It didn't need further layers of imagination on top of it.
That's genius. I love that. I'm going to pick that one up for sure. So then, kind of on that note of good stories, what is, given your genre, what is your favorite scary story? And it could be fictional, it can be historical, or it could be personal.
Oh, the one that freaks me out regularly is it's a real life story. It happened in 1922 in Germany. I can never pronounce the town. Hinterkaifeck. That's it. Hinterkaifeck or Hinterkaifeck, one of the two. Have you ever heard of this one? The Hinterkaifeck murders?
I believe so, but yeah, go through it.
This one gets me, especially so we just had a snowstorm here. We just had like a foot and a half of snow outside my door. And one of my irrational fears is looking out a window and seeing footprints in the snow going toward my house, right, at the night. That image just terrifies me regularly. And that's exactly what happened in Hinterkaifeck. They're above Munich somewhere. And this farmer came home in 1922 and he saw a line of footprints going to his farmhouse, his house. He had some help at the house. He had some family at the house, some children. So he didn't think too much of it. He thought it was weird that it was only going in one direction, that there wasn't footsteps going away or whatever. But he didn't think about it. And then at their house for the next few weeks, strange stuff started happening. Newspapers started disappearing. They could hear noises. So much so that the maid that helped, she quit because she thought the place was haunted. And then one day the family didn't show up at town for a few days. So they showed up I'm telling you some broad strokes. I'm sure I'm getting stuff wrong. But they show up at the farmhouse and they're all dead. It's like a family of 6, including children. They're all dead. Turns out a guy had walked to their house. That was his footsteps. Had hidden in their attic for weeks, like kind of stealing their food and newspapers. And when he'd move, sometimes a board would creak and people would hear that. And just living above them. And they were just unknown, going about their lives while this crazy serial killer is up in their attic. And then one day he just kills them and then lives with them for a few days. He like stacks up their bodies somewhere and like just lives in that house until they were found out. And I think it was never solved. They never actually found the guy. They just found his handiwork, I guess. And that always just keeps me up, that like, it's because it sounds implausible. Like whatever, walking down the street and getting stabbed sounds plausible, especially these days. But like, it doesn't sound plausible that some nefarious person could live in the house without you knowing about it. And then you're just living on borrowed time. It's just a countdown to your death whenever he just feels like getting out of that attic. And that's just, to me, is the fact that it's not one of those things where it like opens the world for me another millimeter. I'm like, oh my God, that can happen. That actually happened. If that can happen, how much more other horrible things can happen. So that's the one that always scares me, especially after a snowstorm. I'm always like looking at over, like I live on the edge of a forest, so like I'm always hoping for just unbroken snow to the forest line. Or I'll go out there, send the kids out there to like go run around and chop up the snow, so that if it does happen, I don't have to see it. I don't see that on the tracks, you know. So that's one of my like ongoing fears, and the scariest story I've ever it gets me. And when I'm thinking about stuff late at night, that one will always get me.
Well, and the fact that it's true, I mean, and it reminds me of the axe murders. I want to say, I can't
the Vizcaya in Iowa.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And they think they figured that one out because he was on, whoever it was getting onto trains, and then the train would go to the next stop. He would get off, go to a house that was nearby, eat their food, kill them all, get on the train again and go.
I see that theory. Yeah. They try to connect everything from the Lizzie Borden to the Vizcaya axe murders. Which it's natural to do, because both those are now morbid bed and breakfast that you can stay at, you know. I think they're actually owned by the same person these days, the same company these days too.
Yeah, stay at a bed and breakfast.
Yeah, so you can stay at that. You can stay at that, both those murder scenes, which is my world, right? Going to like, again, you can tell me the story of a murder and whatever, or folklore, I'll be semi-interested. The second you say, and there's a surviving thing from it, a surviving house, a surviving artifact, a memorial plaque. If I could fit into a camera square, I want to go see that thing and put my hand on it and like get the physical reality of the story.
The bed and breakfast aspect is a little too much. I mean, I like going to the spot, but then I'd be like, because they went to sleep and then they were murdered in their sleep. I'm like, that is a little. Have you done that? You've been there and slept at some of these.
I haven't done the Axe House yet, but I have done Lizzie Borden's twice. Wow. Actually, I've done it twice, and it's kind of weird because I'm hard to scare when I'm around people. If I'm by myself, I can freak myself out like nobody's business. But if there's one person more scared than me in the room, my bravery goes high, right? So it is kind of weird lying there like in her bed or in one of the rooms where somebody was killed and realizing this is where it happened. This is where she thought it up. This is where they walked. This is where the body laid. In fact, last time I was there, they actually had mannequins laid out in the two spots where the murders happened, like right beside the bed. I'm just like, so you're laying in bed with this like bloody mannequin on the floor beside of you, and there's historical photos. There's photos of Lizzie Borden, right, of all the bodies and the autopsies and that. So it's well documented, and so you can really see the physicalness of the story, which I love. Again, that's I think that makes the world more real to me. It's fascinating. So it's not just like a true crime doc. It is a physical spot that today any slub you don't have to have like tons of money or know somebody, can just rent a room there for a night and experience a crime scene.
Yeah, that's fun. My wife would never go with me, unfortunately. If there's a ghost, we were getting our house built. This house was built. Mm-hmm. I asked the builders, we're going through it to do the inspection. And they asked my wife, do you have any questions about the house? And she's asking serious questions. And then they get to me and they're like, do you have any questions? I was like, yes. Was this house built on a graveyard? Did you forget to move the bodies? And I'm being very serious, and they're like, no, of course not. And I was like, Indian burial ground? I mean, this is Western Utah.
Did we do our homework?
Everything?
Yeah.
Did we do our, and then they're looking and I'm like, are you guys not catching the reference here? Like, I don't understand. And it's not. If it was, it's not a bad thing. Like I would be more interested. I'd pay extra for that premium. So no, nothing.
Oh, not everybody's lucky.
Yeah. We are close to what they call Area 52. It's a underground military base in Utah. Yeah. And they don't explain how underground, but that's where we're very close to that. And we'll hear unexplainable booms in the distance. We don't know what that is. So that's cool. That's it. That's all I got. Well, I was going to ask you, might as well, I named this podcast A Literal Journey because I do a lot of work in addiction recovery. I've seen how people, when they adopt a story about their lives, it sort of leads them in one direction and it can be a very negative direction. But once they change or believe in a different story or somebody else's story, it inspires them to move in a different direction. Everything else can change. Nothing else in their life has to change. But the story they believe about themselves can change everything for them. And so I wanted to just highlight authors who are out there authoring and writing good and great stories, even if they're dark and supernatural. There's protagonists who make it through these very dark obstacles. As people read your stories or maybe if there's a story that you like about, something that inspires you to move forward, what is that? What do you think is something that could inspire somebody to move forward?
Yeah, I think for me, the way that happens is bigger context, right? A lot of times, addiction or trauma or anything that happens to you that you turn into part of your narrative, when it brings you down, it's because you don't have a big enough view, right? You don't know what's happening in 20 years. You don't know all the other stuff that happened. It's lack of context, right? Is usually what brings us all down. It makes the world seem smaller and uglier, and all those things that happen to us. So again, we've already talked about Bradbury. I was going to bring him up for this. His Something Wicked This Way Comes is one of those books for me, right? Where it starts out, it's a children's book. The main characters are children, Halloran and Nightshade. And as a kid, that's what I was drawn to, right? I was drawn to these two kids having adventures out at night, fighting evil entities, dark carnivals, growing up, dealing with that. But the older I get, right, where I get farther away from that version of myself, and I'm very far away from that version of myself these days, that book is so good because the adult stories in there are also extremely relevant. So like the book changes as you get older, who you identify with, who you respond to, who makes you think the most. And that book just grows along with you, and it gives you that kind of lifetime perspective, like starting with the kids and ending with the elderly librarian father. And that's kind of what you need. That's kind of what books give in general, right? Whether it's fiction or nonfiction, gives you a perspective, shows you the bigger world. And once you see how big the world is and all the options that are there, you stop feeling kind of doomed, right? That's kind of where we get in those cycles of depression and darkness, and is that feeling of, I can't get out of this. I can't escape this, and nothing will ever be good ever again. And the truth is, I mean, that could happen. I mean, it's not untrue, but the truth is the opportunities for that not happening are massive. We just have to be able to see that context. So that's kind of my book for that, for giving me context over a lifetime. But yeah, I totally agree with you with that, how stories can help us, but they can also massively hinder us as well.
Well, Lindsay was right. Lindsay Curry was right. She was the one who recommended this interview. And she's like, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. I mean, I did. I kept asking for more and more time. Thank you so much, JW, for giving me this time. If people want to read your work, follow your work, support your work, where can they best find you?
So I'm too much on the internet. So if you just type in my name, JW-OCKER, you'll find me. Or you can go to oddthingsiveseen.com. That's kind of my hub. You'll be able to find all my books. You'll be able to find thousands of free articles about my visits. You'll be able to find out what social media I am being silly on. But that's probably the best place, is oddthingsiveseen.com.